But hello and welcome to our webinar with the Mass DOER to discuss the clean energy and clean energy resources permitting and siting process. We have with us today Rick Collins from the Mass DOER. Rick, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am the director of the Division on Clean Energy Siting and Permitting. The division was created after the 2024 climate law, which established a new permitting process for clean energy infrastructure projects, both large and small. We'll get into those specifics in a little bit. But my team has been putting together new regulations and going through the rulemaking process. And we're here to talk about that today and how it will impact your community.
So I believe Rick has a little slideshow, a little presentation that he's going to go through. But if anyone has any questions, please either raise your hand or put it in the chat, and we'll be sure to get to those questions. All right, Rick, did I allow you to share?
All right, so I'm assuming everybody can see it now. All right. Just a little bit of background as to why we're here and talking about this. Massachusetts has pretty ambitious clean energy goals. By the year 2050, the goal is to have an 85% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. It would bring us to about net zero level with 1990 levels. In order to do that, we've been slowly starting to build out our clean energy infrastructure network. That includes 3.3 gigawatts of solar power so far, 113 megawatts of wind, half a gigawatt of energy storage capability. But to hit the goals that we have to really start to see that pipeline increase. Unfortunately, what we had heard was that based on the existing permitting structure, that was one major obstacle to having this happen, that it was just the process was too long. In some cases, 4 to 7 years to get a project permitted. That leads to a lot of soft costs and a lot of increased costs. And honestly, for municipalities, we heard that the process wasn't working well on your end either, in terms of getting quality applications, desired site locations. There was a lot that needed to be fixed. So the 2024 Climate Act did a number of things. One of the things it did was to split up projects into large and small projects. Small projects are handled by municipalities, and those are typically generation projects under 25 megawatts. So that's still a pretty sizable solar farm, for example. It's also a storage project under 100 megawatts, transmission and distribution lines under a mile long. Anything above that is considered a large project, and that's handled by the Energy Facilities Siting Board. One of the other things to try to look at was to try to streamline the permitting process. On the left here is a chart that kind of shows how it currently works, which is that the project has to go before multiple boards: planning, zoning, conservation. And each of those processes have their own permit process. It has their own appeal process. It gets very complicated and lengthy. So one thing that the law did was to create a single permitting process. All the boards and departments do their work, but it all funnels down into one permit. There's one appeal process at the end, and that's to EFSB. There's also now a timeline on how fast these decisions have to be issued. So municipalities will have 12 months to issue all their decisions. Again, all boards and departments can still do their work as required, but those decisions have to be made within 12 months. And at the end, instead of going to housing court or superior court or land court, it's a request for a de novo adjudication through the Energy Facilities Siting Board. It will be an appeals process. They'll have the power to handle any of the permitting issues, and it's kind of a one-stop appeals process. It also required DOER to put together a number of new regulations. For instance, public health, safety, and environmental standards, common application, pre-filing requirements, common conditions, to a whole new process for site suitability analysis and mitigation. So this is the part where we've been working over the past 6 months, is to put together new regulations touching on each of these issues. We're going to walk through a lot of this in the upcoming slides, and we're currently in the public comment period for those regulations. Everything's available on our website, on DOER's website. You can find the draft regs, the draft guidelines. You can find out more about upcoming hearings and comment periods, and we'll discuss that a little bit more as well. So a little bit about the timeline. Last November, the act was signed into law. We staffed up and hired over the spring, and over the summer we started developing regulations. Some of you might have met with some of our team. We've met with more than 100 municipalities in some context to start to get their thoughts and feelings about these issues. We've also had a number of public information sessions last week that you may have heard about. We have one more virtual public hearing. It's actually today at 3:30, and the link for that is on our website as well. Our official public hearing is tomorrow at 7 p.m. And then the public comment period closes Friday at 5 p.m. It's a very quick timeline. It's too quick. Unfortunately, it's the timeline we've been given. So in order to make the March 1st, 2026 deadline required in the state law to have all these new regulations issued, we have to basically have pencils down, all our work done in early November in order to start the intergovernment review process, going through the House committees on telecommunications, utilities, and electricity. It's just the process that it works through. So it's a very quick process. We're trying to get as much information as possible, so I'm very appreciative for anybody on here who has for taking the time to go through this. So we're going to go through the regulations by section. There is, I think, a comment. I don't know if we want to take that now. I'm happy to break that up a little bit.
I was just putting in the chat, just so everyone knows, please ask any questions that you have or drop them in the chat or raise a hand. Any questions that you may have for Rick.
Perfect. All right, so one of the first big things that we've been asked to do is to put together a whole new set of public health, safety, and environmental standards. The state has not done this before. We were asked to do this. Municipalities really wanted it to help them understand on what basis they should be reviewing projects on, what those baselines should be. It's a really complicated issue when we're talking about clean energy, and so they requested some help to understand what the kind of those baselines should be. And developers asked for it as well, because this way they're not dealing with 351 different standards. They want kind of a core one set of standards that they know what to go off of. So what we have done, and these are actually issued through guidelines, just to kind of make the process a little bit easier and cleaner. But what we do is we take a look at a whole range of issues about project design and operation, including setbacks, project monitoring, discharges from equipment, erosion and runoff prevention, impacts on abutting properties, proximity to critical resources. That includes, areas of critical concern, Article 97 land, wetlands protection lands, contamination and remediation. This is a big issue, particularly with battery storage issues. How are we going to handle those standards? Emergency response, what happens when a project is abandoned or decommissioned? All of those standards are contained within the guidelines. We're also allowing governments to adopt additional standards that are reasonable to protect public health, safety, and the environment. So we'll have a baseline, and then if there's a unique need in your community, because we know the region, the Commonwealth is really different regions with different needs, that there'll be an ability to tailor this a little bit to your community's unique needs. So for instance, we're prohibiting infrastructure on slopes greater than 15 degrees. We're hearing just the runoff from some of these projects on the hills it's just uncontainable and it doesn't work. We're looking at nuisance issues such as glare and flicker from turbines and other lighting considerations. We're making it specific that, state regulations that exist apply to these projects and making it clear where they can go and find the details on them. I mentioned earlier, there's been a whole lot of interest about how we're handling battery storage projects. We're specifically saying that the national and state standards, including the NFPA 855 standard, applies to this. That touches on emergency response and training and how it's set up for emergencies. One of the changes is we're allowing municipalities to prohibit siting on Zone 2 wellhead protection areas. The thought being that if we're going to allow communities to prohibit the construction of houses on Zone 2 wellhead areas, we should do the same for industrial developments as well. So we do have questions that we're looking to get information from municipalities on, any stakeholder really. Specifically, what other standards should we include? Are there some standards we missed? Are there standards that aren't strict enough? Anything else you'd want to see in these? We still have the ability to adjust them. All these questions are also on our website too, that if you went to our DOER citing website, there's a link to all of these questions that are included in the slide, as well as this presentation itself. One of the other big changes is new site suitability rules. One of the big complaints we've heard was about the number of projects that basically were involved with either clear cutting forests or being sited in areas of environmental concern. And we heard that and agreed that there are places that these facilities were better off than others. So we've been working with the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs to put together new site suitability criteria. And every project over a certain size, we give an exemption kind of smaller projects that are more like an accessory use to a project or something that's behind the meter. The idea is we want to start to incentivize more projects to take advantage of previously developed land, brownfields, parking lots, maybe an old industrial site that is no longer being used. Really incentivize those sort of locations. And then if you can't get around it and you have to use a site that has an environmental impact, that there's a strict minimization and mitigation process that goes along with that. So every project's going to go through this for the most part. They're going to get ranked on 5 main criteria: development potential, climate change resilience, carbon storage and sequestration, biodiversity, and then social and environmental benefits and burdens. And for each one of those criteria, they get a score 0 to 5. It's a golf score. 0 is the lowest, 5 is the highest. And then based on that scoring, they then has to put together a mitigation plan. The scores will be done by an external third party for consistency's sake and ease, to be honest. So for instance, if there's a project that has a really high carbon sequestration score, it's going to have an impact on carbon sequestration. It's going to clear cut woods. They have to put together a plan to offset that. It's like a one-to-one type of replacement plan. Either they have to plant elsewhere, donate to a tree planting fund, and some other measures. Like there has to be a specific connection to the impact to the mitigation as well. Our guidance has kind of a preliminary list of the types of projects we're looking at. They're based on existing, state grant opportunities. We're looking for other ideas for them as well. The fee that is based on, you take the acreage, you take the number of acres, the fee per acre, and then the score, and that's going to give you a dollar number that's going to estimate about how much of a mitigation package they'll have to put together to deal with this. So some of the questions we've been asking people is, should a community have the right to deny an application if that site suitability score is too high? Or what other mitigation and minimization measures should apply? How much of a mitigation project should offset a poor score? If you have a 5 in something and you propose a certain package, how much does it lower it by? We're still working some of these ideas out. So just to pause here, this is a lot of information that we're tossing at you. please feel free to pause and ask questions and ask for clarifications. This is kind of one of our other big goals with this, is to start to put together a plan on how we can provide technical assistance and other guidance when this rulemaking process is all done. It's a lot. It's a whole new process. Honestly, we're still making sure it all works together. So we're looking for people to kind of poke holes in it and to make sure, do some stress tests to make sure that it works well. But if there's no questions, I'll move right along. So pre-filing requirements is kind of one of the bigger new steps in this process. And this is based on feedback we've received that a lot of projects come through. They haven't talked to the public. They haven't talked to stakeholders. It's based on faulty information. The applications are coming in incomplete or with bad information. So before even the whole application process starts, there's about a 60-day pre-filing process. And what they're going to do is they're going to come in with kind of an outline of their plan, and they're going to have a community outreach plan. And this outreach plan is spelled out in our guidelines, kind of what the expectations are. And, they'll have to have a website or at least a web page where people can get information on the project. They'll have to do some sort of outreach in terms of noticing or, advertising, so people are aware that the project is happening. They'll have to have at least one community meeting that people can go to and ask questions. And the applicant also has to meet with town officials and to make sure that, the site is what they say it is, that there's no other assets or impacts that they aren't aware of, that they know all of the permits that they have to request, and all the information that's going to be required to do so. This way, everyone's kind of on the same page and they know what they have to do to move forward. Like I said, we have guidelines that talk about expectations. If municipalities feel like they haven't done a good job or haven't lived up to the spirit of the expectation, they can send them back for another 30 days to go do more outreach. And that's very specifically outlined, in the rules. But we want to make sure that they're giving a good faith effort, that if it's a rural community, they're doing the best practices for outreach in rural communities. They're not holding meetings on, the same day as parent-teacher conferences or other holidays, that, they're doing what's right. So we want to know, what type of outreach do you find helpful during this process? What's the best way of noticing abutters and other stakeholders? How should the process be different for smaller projects versus larger projects? We don't want to give a business owner who's looking to put a small array out, back of their building, having to go through an expensive outreach project. But, there is some stuff that needs to be done for some of the other types of projects that come through here. One of the other tasks is to create a universal local permit application. Basically, the idea is just to provide some additional consistency so that there isn't 351 different applications floating around out there. Plus the fact that there are some communities who use online permitting platforms, and there are some who are still using paper applications. So what we are doing is we are creating a universal application, similar to how DEP hosts all the Conservation Commission application forms on its website. We're going to do the same thing. We're working to make sure that the application covers all needed local permits to the extent that we can. We know that in some towns there's some different little variables. Maybe there's shade tree bylaw still. Maybe there's historical commission needs. We want to make sure that the application has all of the request forms for everything that they need for the application. It's going to be hosted through an online permitting portal that we're developing. The portal won't be up immediately, but we'll have a electronic form that we'll be sending out and applicants will be able to use. Again, it'll be universal across the communities. So one thing that's really important in this is the idea that because there's now a 12-month clock ticking on the review process, that towns can't be sitting around waiting for developers to provide additional information or to fill in the blanks. So the application has to come in fully filled out with accurate data, everything that's needed to start a review the next day. There's no TBDs, there's no we're figuring this out, there's no anything else. It's the application is ready to go. And if it's not, the town's going to send it back to the town, to the developer and say you have 30 days to cure any deficiencies. If you don't, it's going to be rejected and you have to start the process all over. The expectation is, again, that when a developer sends in an application moving forward, that it's fully filled out, that it's accurate, and that every department and board can start reviewing it the next day. So, a couple of questions we have are, what tools would be helpful to help municipalities meet this 12-month timeframe, as well as criteria that towns can use to judge if an application is complete. Like, this is a really big key point. We don't want, towns having to wait 60 days for additional information. So it's ready to go or it isn't. So during this whole process, we know there's going to be questions that arise, that there's going to be little disputes. Maybe a developer says, no, our application is complete. The town says, no, it's not. So rather than having things get derailed through some of these disagreements, we're going to create what's called a circuit rider program. DEP has used this a bit. And basically, it's kind of like an intermediary to help get involved and figure out, like, no, you really haven't done what you're required to under the law here. Or, no, that's a pretty strict interpretation. I think this is fine. It's not an adjudicatory board. It's more just kind of an intermediary to step in and say, this is what the guidelines mean. This is what the expectation is. Let's move forward. We don't want to get these things hung up on appeals. So we're going to create this using our regional coordinators that are already on board. We want to know if you've had good experiences with the DEP circuit rider program in the past, what's worked, what hasn't, and how you think this would be most helpful moving forward. Just want to check any questions or comments. All right. So if a town does not, I just want to step back 1 second as well, because we get this question a lot too. One question that gets brought up is, well, what if the developer starts dragging their heels? We have 12 months. They could drag their heels and just hope for constructive approval, and then they don't have to deal with any of our special conditions or anything. And it's a good question. I'm on the planning board in my town, and I certainly know that developers can be slow at times. So there is language in the regulations that say applicants have certain amounts of time they have to respond back to questions. I think it's 72 hours they have to respond for questions. If they have to turn around a new plot plans, they have 30 days. They can't wait 90 days to get you new plans. They need to expect to be going quickly and helping this process along as well. So if for some reason a community isn't able to issue all its decisions in 12 months, the applicant will get what's called constructive approval and will be allowed to move forward. So we have created a set of common conditions and requirements in those cases. That's so that the applicant doesn't get a blank check to do whatever they want on a site, that there will be certain expectations. And these cover administrative and legal conditions like, hey, you have to follow all state and federal and local laws. You can't just go do whatever you want. We talk about visual impacts and earthwork removal, stormwater control, hazmat storage if there's a need for that. All these different sort of topics that are part of the conditioning process. What we hope is that these common conditions will kind of serve as a baseline for projects that do make the 12-month deadline, and communities can put on top of them whatever reasonable conditions they feel are appropriate too. But we feel like this is a good kind of stepstone to start the conversation. These are available in guidelines currently as well. So there are little pieces in here that will require some thought and consideration by communities, such as who is the person that handles the pre-filing steps and who handles the application and reviews it. Do we have a question?
Yes, we do have a
Yep.
question. I'll just
Great.
read it for you. So we have a question saying, what happens if one local board denies a permit but others approve? Is
Yep.
the entire project considered denied, or can it proceed with conditions?
Yep. So we get that question a lot. It is set up so that if a board denies it, that the final permit would be a denial. It's an all or nothing type. And that's so that it can then be appealed through the de novo process. Even if, conservation denies it, 60 days into the process, all the other boards and departments still kind of need to do their work. That way the whole thing can be submitted for the appeal and not just that one particular decision. That's the format that was set up at, so that the three solutions are, you can either be, the final permit either be approved with conditions, or denied. And if a board or department decides it's a denial, then the whole thing is denied, but everyone still has to do their work, with the assumption it's going to go through the appeal process. Was there another one, or is that
They just
okay?
said thank you, thank you. So thanks for the question.
All right.
Appreciate it. Keep going.
So we have put together kind of an administrative model bylaw on this, kind of thinking that towns and cities and towns are structured differently. Arlington does their work much differently than, Barry does its work. So we want to give communities the ability to kind of tailor this process to the way that it fits its government structure the best. So there's an administrative model bylaw coming out that will allow communities to decide who is the point person to handle, some of these details, whether boards and departments are going to work, concurrently, or if it's going to be like an order in which things are approved. Someone to make sure that, everybody's working together and communicating, and everything kind of is aligned as well. So that language is being finalized as well. Enforcement, we've heard a lot about enforcement. Want to make sure that if a facility gets sold or transferred, that everything, all the permits, all the decisions, conditions, mitigation applies to the successor. I'm surprised to hear that in some instances that they think that doesn't apply, but apparently that argument is made. It makes it very clear that if Group A permits the project and then immediately sells it to Group B, that everything applies to Group B as well. Group B can come back and ask for modifications to the permit, but the municipality is not obligated to reconsider. And if they do, it's through the standard permitting process. So concurrency and transition is one area where we're having, admittedly, some challenges figuring out. And here's why. So normally when the state would offer new regulations, there'd be a transitional period, 6, 9, 12 months, that would allow local communities to read them, digest them, figure out how they want to apply, have a public hearing, create new zoning bylaws or ordinances. And that way they have some sort of lead time to react. So these regulations are scheduled to come out March 1st, which is smack in the middle of town meeting season. Which would not give many communities a chance to react in a timely fashion. So, allowing them to go through a special town meeting period, in the summer and the fall. The initial idea was that we're going to say these regulations would go into effect on December 1st, 2026, give about 9 months so that communities have a chance to read and react. However, things have changed very quickly on the federal level. And developers are feeling the crush to get projects in before the federal tax incentives go away in 2027. The tax rules have also changed, so that's no longer good enough to just be kind of in the permitting process. You now have to have shovels in the ground and the project being built to qualify, to be grandfathered in and qualify for those tax incentives. So to wait until December 1st to have this go into effect is going to give the industry a very, very small window to get these projects going. It might not work at all. So we are trying to figure out if there is a way to balance the two needs, which is one, to allow towns time to absorb the new rules and address them, while also not closing the window on new projects for another 9 months. We're looking for thoughts on how to do this. We're hoping to get information out as much as possible so that maybe they can react during the annual town meeting in the spring. But it's going to be a really tricky kind of situation to figure out how to work it. So, as I mentioned, we are in the process of our public information and hearings period. Our official public hearing on these regulations is Wednesday, October 15th at 7 o'clock. There'll be a time for us to listen to comments from people. In addition, ahead of that, though, we are having a public information session this afternoon at 3:30. Again, this is a chance to have more of a two-way conversation. And we've had some great conversations already across the state. It's going to be, the presentation will be very similar to what was discussed here today, but it will also give you a chance to hear what other communities, other stakeholders are thinking about this whole process. People do have opinions for sure. And then EFSB, which handles the larger projects, they're having their regulatory hearings coming up starting October 27th as well. So that's it for me for right now. I encourage you to go to the website, get all the information we've gone over here is on the website today. It's a lot. I know people have to hear it a couple of times to really fully digest it and understand it. And there's a lot of other things on your plate as well. So I appreciate you taking the time today to listen. But if there are any questions I can answer or other things you want to discuss, happy to do so at this time.
I also did just pasted the regulations into the chat to review, and I also
Great.
pasted Rick's contact. His email address is there at rick.collins@mass.gov if you do have any questions. We're also holding the same webinar on Thursday morning at 9 a.m. If you want to come back, if you have other questions you want to ask live, or just learn more, you had anything that came to mind after listening here. And we really just thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you for joining Capital Strategic Solutions and the Mass DOER and Rick. And we just appreciate you learning about this new process.
Thank you for letting me talk today. I really do appreciate it.
We appreciate you joining us, Rick. Thank you so much.
Great.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.